Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Monday, December 8th, and for today's headlines we have NYPD releases 2 new photos of man sought in killing of United Healthcare CEO. Assad is granted asylum in Russia as rebel seeks control of Syrian capital. Payments are going digital, but many seniors still rely on cash. They love France, so when Notre Dame burned down, they wanted to help. Wizard of Oz ruby slippers sell at auction for a record $28 million. NYPD releases 2 new photos of man sought in killing of United Healthcare CEO. They have seen him smiling on a hostile security camera, but they don't know his name. They found the backpack he discarded while fleeing, but they don't know where he's gone. As the search for United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson's killer goes on, investigators are reckoning with the tantalizing economy. They have troves of evidence, but the shooter remains an enigma. Police don't know who he is, where he is, or why he did it, though they are confident it was a targeted attack instead of a random act. The net is tightening, New York City Mayor Eric Adams said on Saturday. Hours after he spoke, police divers were seen searching a pond in Central Park, where the killer fled after the shooting. Officers have been scouring the park for days for any possible clues and found his bag there Friday. Late Saturday, police released 2 additional photos of the suspected shooter that appeared to be from a camera mounted inside a taxi. The first shows him walking outside the vehicle, and the second shows him looking through the partition between the black seat and the front of the cab. In both, his face is partially obscured by a blue medical-style mask. Retracing the gunman's steps using surveillance video, police say. It appears he had left the city by bus soon after the shooting Wednesday morning outside the New York Hilton Midtown. He was seen on video at an uptown bus station about 45 minutes later, near NYPD Chief of Detectives Joseph Kenney said. With the high-profile search expanding across state lines, the FBI announced late Friday that it was offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction, adding to a reward of up to $10,000 that the NYPD has offered. Police say they believe the suspect acted alone. Police provided no updates on the hunt Saturday, but investigators are urging patience, even with the killer on the loose. Hundreds of detectives are combing through video recordings and social media, vetting tips from the public and interviewing people who might have information, including Thompson's family and co-workers and the shooter's randomly assigned roommates at the Manhattan hostel where he stayed. This isn't Blue Bloods. We're not going to solve this in 60 minutes, Kenney told reporters Friday. We're painstakingly going through every bit of evidence that we come across. The shooter paid cash at the hostel, presented what police believe was a fake ID, and is believed to have paid cash for taxi rides and other transactions. He didn't speak to others at the hostel and almost always kept his face covered with a mask, only lowering it while eating. But investigators caught a break when they came across security camera images of an unguarded moment in which he briefly showed his face soon after arriving in New York on November 24th. Police distributed the images to news outlets and on social media, but so far haven't been able to ID him using facial recognition, possibly because of the angle of the images or limitations on how NYPD is allowed to use that technology, Kenney said. On Friday evening, investigators found a backpack in Central Park that had been worn by the gunman, police said. They did not immediately reveal what, if anything, it contained, but said it would be tested and analyzed. Another potential clue, a fingerprint on an island he purchased at Starbucks minutes before the shooting, has so far proved useless for identifying him, Kenney said. Aided by surveillance cameras on nearly every building and block, police have been able to retrace the shooter's movements. They know he ambushed Thompson at 6:44 a.m. as the executive arrived at the Hilton for his company annual investor conference, usually using a 9mm pistol that resembled the guns farmers used to put down animals without causing a loud noise. They know ammunition found near Thompson's body bore the words delay, deny, and depose, mimicking a phrase used by insurance industry critics. Kenney said that the fact that the shooter knew United Healthcare Group was holding a conference at the hotel and what route Thompson might take to get there suggested he would possibly be a disgruntled employee or client. Investigators know from surveillance video that the shooter fled into Central Park on a bicycle and ditched it around 7 a.m. near 85th Street. Then he walked a couple blocks, got into a taxi, arriving at 7:30 a.m. at the George Washington Bridge bus station, which is near the northern tip of Manhattan, and offers commuter service to New Jersey and Greyhound routes to Philadelphia, Boston, and Washington. Investigators don't know what happened next. They are searching through more surveillance video, but have yet to locate video of the shooter getting on a bus or exiting the station. We have reason to believe that the person in question has left New York City, Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch told CNN on Friday. Police have determined from video that the gunman was in the city for 10 days before the shooting. He arrived in Manhattan's main bus terminal on the Greyhound bus that originated in Atlanta, though it's not clear whether he embarked there or at one of the half-dozen stops along the route. Immediately after that, he took a cab to the vicinity of the Hilton and was there for about an hour, Kenny said. At around 11 p.m. on the night he arrived, he went by taxi to the HI New York City hostel. It was there, while speaking with an employee in the lobby, that he briefly pulled down his mask and smiled, giving investigators the brief glimpse they are now relying on to identify and capture a killer. Assad is granted asylum in Russia as rebels seize control of the Syrian capital. A rapid advance by Syrian rebel groups on the country's capital has led to the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's control of a nation his family had ruled for half a century. Crowds celebrated the seismic political shift in the streets of Damascus overnight and into Sunday, as Syrian state television broadcast a statement from a group of rebels, one dressed in a black hoodie, who announced that Assad had been deposed. The Russian state news agency TASS posted on social media that Assad had landed in Moscow with his family and would be granted asylum by the Kremlin. With Assad gone, the rebels said they had taken the step of freeing all Syrian prisoners from jail. The man reading that statement on television, just hours after the city's fall, had echoed calls from the leading group in this lighting rebel offense, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, demanding that citizens and fighters alike ensure the country's national institutions were protected. He ended his statement with the declaration after more than 13 years of bloody civil conflict, "Long live a free Syria." Another separate video showed the country's prime minister, Ghazi al-Jahali, being escorted from his home by armed rebels to hand formal power to a committee formed by various rebel groups known as the Syrian Military Operations Command. Assad's downfall came less than 2 weeks after initial incursion west of the country's second-largest city, Aleppo, triggered a cascading series of routes and retreats by the demoralized Syrian military. President Biden called Assad's toppling a fundamental act of justice and a moment of historic opportunity during remarks from the White House in which he described how Assad's abhorrent government had brutalized, tortured, and killed hundreds of thousands of ordinary Syrians. Biden also hailed the weakness of Hamas, Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, which he said had made it impossible for these powers to continue to prop up Assad after military actions of self-defense from Israel and Ukraine that had continued with unflagging support from the U.S. The U.S. military on Sunday afternoon said it carried out dozens of airstrikes throughout the day, targeting what is called known ISIS camps and operatives in central Syria. The group had maintained a small and disparate presence in parts of northeastern and central Syria since an international coalition in 2019 retook control of the last vestiges of its territory. The U.S. Military Central Command, based in Tampa, Florida, said in a statement that a variety of American military aircraft participated in the strikes, which were designed to ensure the group does not seek to take advantage of the current situation to reconstitute in central Syria. Questions about what comes next. The United Nations, United States, and other governments worldwide have acknowledged this weekend's events as highly significant watershed moment, with the UN calling for rebels to host talks that can lead to more inclusive government for the country. The UN's lead envoy to Syria, Geir Pedersen, said that more than a decade of brutal civil war has left deep scars in Syria, but now was the time for all parties to prioritize dialogue, and he would be looking forward with cautious hope for a nation's new developments. Efforts by the UN and others to build a successful transnational government will be complicated by the fact that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that Islamist group that has led this offensive to topple al-Assad, is designed as a terrorist organization by the UN, US, and others. The group's leader, Abu Mohammed al-Ghani, has, however, sought to present a far more moderate face in recent months, as analysts have told NPR. But while Germany's leading diplomat has described al-Assad's toppling as a great relief for Syrian people, she has also cautioned against radicalization, particularly given what has expected to be HTS's leading role in any future form of government. The country must now fall into the hands of other radicals, said Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, whatever form they take. Iran, which together with Russia played a leading role in supporting al-Assad's rule for many years, made unverifiable claims that rebels had attacked its embassy in Damascus on Sunday, airing footage from a television network that seemed to show a diplomatic compound. However, diplomats had reportedly left the embassy before any attack, according to an online post in the Iranian newspaper, the Tehran Times, which cited the country's foreign ministry. Russia, which has long used its military to prop up the Assad's regime against wide-ranging opposition forces, has long maintained an air base and naval repair hub in Syria. But the Russian embassy in Damascus has said its staff are fine and that those bases appear unharmed. Nonetheless, a leading foreign affairs lawmaker in the upper house of the Russian parliament has said Assad's departure will mean difficult times ahead for Syria, a country known for its patchwork mosaic of ethnicities, religions, and political affiliations. Syria is a very difficult story for everyone without exception, said Konstantin Kozhkovos, who is the deputy chair of the Russian Senate. One way or another, the civil war will not end today. There are too many opposing interests and too many opposing forces. The situation has evolved very quickly, according to Philip Nazzarini, the head of the UN agency dedicated to Palestinian refugees, UNRWA. It's like the fall of the House of Cards, he told NPR at a policy forum in Qatar, that his organization camps in Syria house around 400,000 people, but have largely remained calm with some services continuing to operate. He said he hoped the transition process would allow schools to reopen in the camps. Israel heightens security as Lebanon opens border crossings. Meanwhile, in neighboring Israel, authorities are strengthening their security measures in the Golan Heights, the border region that Israel largely seized from Syria in the War of 1967. The Israeli military said it had helped UN peacekeepers based in the region to stave off several armed men over the weekend, but would not interfere in Syria's international events, and would simply keep certain areas of the Golan Heights closed to act as a buffer zone for security reasons. On another Syrian border with Lebanon, over which at least 1 million Syrians had fled as refugees since the start of the country's civil war, Lebanese authorities have instead opened the border crossing in anticipation of a reverse flow of refugees seeking to return home after years away. Israeli strikes in recent weeks have damaged several of the border crossings between Lebanon and Syria, through which the Israeli military says the armed group Hezbollah has often sought to smuggle weapons that ultimately originate in Iran. The Lebanese army, still working to redeploy troops to its southern border with Israel as part of its recent ceasefire agreement, has said it's also sending more units to its northern and eastern borders with Syria in light of recent events. Payments are going digital, but many seniors still rely on cash. We're putting another burden on the elderly that we don't have to do, one researcher said. Some things you can no longer do with cash. Buy a well-loaded hot dog at any of the 5 Devil Dog eateries in and around Chicago. Order a Vermont Pale Lager from Hill Farmstead Brewery's taproom in Greensboro Bend, Vermont. Attend the annual Beach Life Festival in Redondo Beach, California, or buy food, drinks, or merchandise there. Purchase admission to the home of Franklin D. Roosevelt National Historic Site in Hyde Park, New York, or to many other sites maintained by the National Park Service. The Park Service expanding no-cash policy exacerbated several would-be visitors, enough for them to sue in federal court earlier this year. Ann Ronan, 70, a retired attorney, walks around Lake Merritt in Oakland, California a few times a week. After the 3-mile-plus trek, she sometimes stops at one of 2 local cafes. Neither accepts payments in cash. Nor do a restaurant and a cocktail lounge nearby on Grand Avenue. I don't find it unusual anymore, Miss Ronan said. To buy coffee and a croissant, she routinely carries a credit card in her pocket. She doesn't find that bothersome, but as a public policy, it's not a good thing. Jay Zagorowski, an economist at the Boston University Questrom School of Business, and author of a forthcoming book called The Power of Cash, agrees. Though the United States is not yet a cashless society, this is picking up speed all over the world, he said. Some no-cash practices date to contingent fears after the outbreak of COVID. Others are intended to discourage robberies. It has deterred a lot of crime, Dana Bitchheimer, the chief executive of Devil Dog, said. The chain went cashless in 2021. But such policies disadvantage a number of groups, including low-income people who do not have bank accounts, people who have accounts but don't qualify for credit or debit cards, the homeless, undocumented immigrants, and older adults. Consumers of any age can encounter problems with electronic payments despite their convenience and ubiquity, although every bill declares it as legal tender for all debts, public and private. There is no federal law mandating that private business accept cash. One example: we're seeing an increase in major national weather disasters, and they take down the cashless society, Dr. Zorowski said. It depends on electricity, telecommunication networks, and secure computer networks, all threatened by floods, hurricanes, and fires. Moreover, the idea that we have trustworthy computer networks is farcical, he added. In a cashless society, mobsters from Thailand or Kenya can attack you. At least with cash, a thief has to be within striking distance. Researchers have reported for years that consumers spend more when they are using credit and debit cards, which obscure what economists call the pain of paying. Tapping or swiping, gratifying consumers immediately while delaying the eventual paying, feels less real than handing over cash. It's too easy to make a purchase with your phone and credit card. You just touch it, said Ruth Suswin, the Director of Consumer Protection at Consumer Action, the National Educational and Advocacy Organization. It's like magic until the bill arrives. Privacy concerns, too, cut across age differences. If I give you a $5 bill and you give me a sandwich, no one is the wiser, said Jay Stanley, the Senior Policy Analyst at the ACLU. By contrast, the middlemen facilitating digital transactions, credit card companies, banks, the tech giants behind mobile apps, survey the hell out of everything we do, then sell consumers' data, he said. But older people may face particular obstacles as cash loses ground to electronic payments. A lot of these cashless systems are implemented through smartphones, Mr. Stanley said. The level of smartphone ownership is lower among older adults, and facility with using them is also lower. True, Pew Research has reported that only 79% of people over 65 have a smartphone, compared to 97% of people aged 30 to 49. Consumers over 55 used cash for 22% of payments last year, according to the Federal Reserve, compared with 12% among younger groups. Last fall, when a federal survey asked respondents if they had used the internet for financial services like online banking and bill paying, or for sending money via services like Cash App, Venmo, or PayPal, 85% of those in their 20s and 30s said yes. The proportion dropped significantly among older consumers to 70% of people in their 60s and to 64% of those in their 70s. Among consumers over 80, only about half use the internet for financial services. Cash is very simple, Dr. Zorowski noted. No buttons to push, no passwords to remember. When businesses and government agencies insist on electronic payment, we're putting another burden on the elderly that we don't have to. The threat of fraud also affects seniors disproportionately. Online scams often target older adults, Ms. Suswin said. The Federal Trade Commission recently reported that adults over 60 are less likely than younger adults to report losing money to fraud, but when they do, the loss totals run substantially higher. The number of seniors who reported losing $100,000 or more has tripled since 2020. Older adults are far more likely than younger ones to lose money to tech support scams, lottery and sweepstakes swindles, and family impersonations, the report said. Losses to investment and romance cons continue to climb, too. Electronic payment can also harm low-income seniors by making overspending easier. About 14% of people receiving Social Security retirement benefits rely on them for 90% or more of family income, the Social Security Administration said. The average monthly retirement benefit in 2024, $1,907. There's not much margin for the kind of overspending that digital transactions make easier. A few states, including Massachusetts, Colorado, and New Jersey, have passed legislation requiring businesses, with certain exceptions, to accept cash. Legislators in other states, Florida and Vermont, have included similar bills. Several cities, New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco among them, have also adopted laws prohibiting no-cash policies. The action may soon shift to Congress. A bipartisan group of senators, and representatives have sponsored the Payment Choice Act, requiring retail businesses to accept cash for on-site purchases of $500 or less. First introduced in 2019 and reintroduced with some revisions last year, it's gathering dust, said Jeff Thins, who consulted firm in Virginia represents the newly formed Payment Choice Coalition. Its corporate supporters include Armored Car Companies, a bank based in Cincinnati, a risk management firm, and a manufacturer of currency printing and sorting machines. The coalition intends to resurrect the legislation and push hard for its passage. We're not arguing for the demise of credit cards or payment apps, Mr. Thin said. We want cash to remain a choice. Resistance from biggest banks, credit card companies, and tech giants could be fierce, but consumer advocacy and privacy groups might lend the bill their support. We have a good shot at moving this forward, Mr. Thin predicted. Plenty of older adults are adept at mobile apps or comfortable with credit cards, but still want the cash option preserved. Maureen Eldison, a consultant at Montclair, New Jersey, visited the Penn Museum of the University of Pennsylvania campus a few years ago and stopped to buy a bottled drink at its cafe. The cashier regretfully told her she could not pay with cash, a policy related to COVID that has since been dropped. Miss Eldison, 67, could have pulled out a credit card, but it's not my habit to use it for things like that, she said. It's not what my generation does. On principle, she asked for directions to the nearest water fountain. They love France, so when Notre Dame burned down, they wanted to help. A couple from North Carolina are part of the second largest group of donors to a huge fundraising effort to restore the famous cathedral. Americans. Like many of the millions of tourists who visit Paris, Nick and Susie Trevano of Charlotte, North Carolina, would usually catch at least a glimpse of Notre Dame on their frequent visits to town. Often, the Trevanos, who were Catholics, would go to the cathedral and pray for family, friends, and peace. On Saturday, they were back in Paris to offer a prayer for Notre Dame itself. The centuries-old cathedral, badly damaged by fire in April 2019, reopened on Saturday with an official ceremony after restoration carried out by roughly 2,000 workers. They labored on what President Emmanuel Macron of France have called the most beautiful construction site of the century, in an effort funded with about $900 million in donations from around the world. The Trevanos were among those who donated. They were moved to contribute after watching horrified as a live video feed showed the mainstay of European history, culture, and faith engulfed in flames and teetering on the brink of oblivion. On Saturday morning, Mr. Trevanosano, 77, and Mrs. Trevanosano, 72, were taking coffee and croissants on the ground floor of the Hotel of Regina Louvre on the right bank of the Seine. They were still buzzing from the night before, when they had attended a special meal for donors at the Tour d'Argent, the fine dining establishment in the 5th arrondissement that dates back to 16th century. They were served plates of poached lobster and duck, but the main course was the view of Notre Dame through the big windows. The cathedral is still partly clad in spindly scaffolding. The restoration job will not be fully done for years, but there, dramatically lit against the night sky, the cathedral seemed to announce to the donors and to the world that it had recovered. I don't think there was a closed mouth, Mrs. Trevansano said. The jaws were dropping. After the French, Americans were the second largest donors to the Notre Dame project, offering an estimated $62 million to the cause, said Michael Picard, president of Friends of Notre Dame de Paris, a nonprofit group that helped lead the international fundraising push. Mr. Picard said some 45,000 American donors gave to the charity alone, with many other Americans donating to similar groups. That generosity was a testament to the enduring hold that France has on American hearts. Some people chipped in a few dollars, others gave millions, including the Star Foundation of New York and the Marie Jose and Henry R. Kravis Foundation of West Palm Beach, Florida. In an interview, the Trevanos declined to disclose exactly how much they contributed, but on the website The Friends of Notre Dame de Paris, Mr. Trevanos noted that they gave enough to be recognized as the Quasimodo Circle level, which means a gift of at least $10,000. It's always held a very special place in our hearts, Mrs. Trevasolano said. It's kind of like a corner store for everything that's important to us. The outpouring of American largesse for Notre Dame is part of a centuries-old tradition of mutual aid between the two countries that has survived many famous quarrels. It began with King Louis XIV's contribution to the American Revolution. In the 20th century, the United States pumped billions into France to help rebuild the country after World War II. Neither gift was purely altruistic. King Louis XVI opened his purse to the American rebels to weaken the British, France's great 18th century rival, while the Americans, according to a Central Intelligence Agency memo made public in 2004, hoped that huge cash injections into France in the latter half of the 1940s would help quell intense post-war labor unrest fueled by French communists and support the idea of salvation beyond revolution. The trivialitas, altruism, was far less complicated. Neither has blood ties to France. They simply fell in love with the place. He grew up in lower middle class in Brooklyn. She grew up on a farm in New Mexico. He first saw Notre Dame in 1964 after talking his parents into letting him come on a trip to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. She first saw Notre Dame a few years later when her parents, who had been working for the U.S. Foreign Service in Uttar Pradesh, India, stopped in the French capital on their way home. They were married in 2000, and over the years, France continued to beckon. They are not alone. With 100 million international tourist arrivals last year alone, France, according to the United Nations figures, is the most visited country in the world. The United States sent its backpackers, grand marts, art lovers, Emily in Paris fans, and a group from travel planners often referred to as HNWIs, or high net worth individuals. The Travasanos, who are retired, fall into the latter group. Mr. Travasanos made his living in finance as a chairman and chief executive of a provider of marketing information for consumer packaged good companies. She was a classical clarinetist by training, but also had a long career in the business world. Both of them in recent years had fallen hard for the pleasures of Burgundy, both the region and the prize and often expensive wine. Both are members of the Confrérie des Chevaux du Travain, the worldwide organization of devoted Burgundy fans, and many of their recent trips to France have been in the storied region. There, on the small farms and the homes of winemakers, Miss Travasano said their conversations often run on gestures and bonhomie, while their limited French runs out. "We've become fluent in French," Mrs. Travasano said with a chuckle. "We just can't understand a word they're saying." Mr. Travasano, who's formerly served in the U.S. Army Reserve, noted that the bodies of thousands of U.S. soldiers are buried in French soil. Such, he said, are strong and tangible roots of the friendship. On April 15, 2019, the Travasananos were on a plane watching the Masters golf tournament on their cell phones when the coverage was interrupted by the footage of Notre Dame on fire. It gutted them. Later, Mr. Travasanano said they received a solicitation in the mail that asked them to donate to the rebuilding effort. After their contribution, they were invited, with other U.S. donors, to dine at the French Embassy's residence in Washington. Mr. Travasano eventually became a board member of the Friends of Notre Dame de Paris group. At breakfast on Saturday, they said they were waiting for further instructions for attending the evening's reopening ceremony, to which they'd also been invited. The French organizers seemed to be doing some last-minute improvisation around matters of protocol and timing due to President-elect Donald J. Trump's late announcement that he planned to attend and a weather forecast that was calling for rain. As a young man, Mr. Travasano had studied for a career in the priesthood before moving into the secular world of business. He said that Mr. Trump's planned attendance, the event on Saturday, seemed to have taken on more of a political than a spiritual tone. He said he was more excited about the inaugural Mass on Sunday morning. "The dignitaries are going to be gone," he said. "Trump is going to be gone, and we're going to get to be parishioners." Wizard of Oz ruby slippers sell at auction for a record $28 million. The slippers worn by Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz were stolen from the museum that bears her name in 2005 before investigators recovered them in 2018. The ruby slippers that Judy Garland wore as Dorothy in the 1939 production of The Wizard of Oz were sold for the record-breaking $28 million on Saturday during a live auction in Dallas, in the latest turn for one of the most recognizable and storied artifacts in film history. Heritage Auction sold the slipper on behalf of a collector, Michael Shaw, who owned them. The slippers, which sold for vastly more than $10 million that the auction's House Executive Vice President Joe Maddalena believed they would, are one of the only 4 known surviving pairs worn by Miss Garland in the movie. The auction house did not immediately disclose the identity of the buyer. There is simply no comparison between Judy Garland's ruby slippers and any other piece in Hollywood memorabilia, Mr. Maddalena said. The final bid of $28 million, which is the largest sum spent at an auction for a piece of entertainment memorabilia, the auction house said. It exceeded the previous record holder, Marilyn Monroe's subway dress from the 1955 film The 7-Year Itch, which sold in 2011 for $5.5 million with fees, the auction house said. Including taxes and fees, the slippers sold for $32.5 million. During the auction, which was peppered with Wicked and Wizard of Oz references and puns, the auctioneer excitedly held a crouching position, like the Wicked Witch of the West in the story, as he pointed to people around the room, who called out bids at $100,000 increments. At times, a bidder, often on the phone with the client, would elevate the top bid by $800,000 or more, which garnered some stifled oohs and ahs from attendees. The auction included other pieces of Wizard of Oz memorabilia. A Wicked Witch of the West hat worn by actress Margaret Hamilton sold for nearly $3 million, the auction house said. In addition to being featured in some of the most famous scenes in one of the most popular movies in film history, the slippers have an intriguing story that have added to their lore. Mr. Shaw had lent the slippers to the Judy Garland Museum in the actress's hometown of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where they were stolen on August 27, 2005. FBI agents set up a sting operation and recovered the slippers in Minneapolis in July 2018. The Minnesota man, Terry Martin, was later indicted and pleaded guilty to the theft. A second Minnesota man, Jerry Hall Salterman, was charged in connection with the theft this year. The authorities believe Mr. Martin was under the impression that the slippers were made with real rubies, which he planned to sell. The rubies, however, were made of glass. Jane Heights, the executive director of the Judy Garland Museum, has said the museum was raising money for donors to win back the slippers at an auction and had been given $100,000 by the Minnesota legislator. But Mrs. Heights said on Saturday she realized at a very early stage in the auction that the museum would not win the bid. It's kind of closing the book on a chapter of the ruby slippers for us, and that's okay, Miss Heights said. I think it's a testament to how important the Wizard of Oz is to the world that they sold for that much. For $20,000, the museum did buy a painting depicting the scene where the Wicked Witch's hands are zapped as she tries to take Dorothy's slippers, Miss Heights said. The money from the legislator, minus some small sum that was used to try to facilitate the purchase, will go back to the state, she said. The money raised by donors may go to a Wizard of Oz themed miniature golf course or some other exhibit, Miss Heights said. During the film production, the costume team made at least 4 pairs of slippers for Miss Garland to wear in case one of the slippers was ruined, according to Rice Thomas, who wrote The Ruby Slippers of Oz, a book about their history. Although the slippers look nearly identical, a consultant for the Smithsonian analyzed slight differences in the pairs and determined that the ones that were sold on Saturday were in many of the famous scenes in the movie. Large portions of the famous Will Off to See the Wizard song feature Miss Garland skipping in the bright red $28 million shoes. That is all that we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye!